Good. I'd like to welcome everybody out to our meeting tonight. Tonight, Brady Christensen will be giving us our opening remarks, and following his opening remarks, he'll lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I'm going to do my opening remarks tonight in the form of a prayer. Our Father in heaven, we're thankful for our many blessings. We're grateful this night for the opportunity that we have to gather as the Planning Commission and members of the county. We're grateful for the freedoms which we enjoy, for the opportunities we have to pursue our different forms of earning livings and doing the things that we enjoy. We're appreciative for our leaders. We're thankful for all the many blessings that Thou hast blessed us with. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. If you could join with me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Brady. We have quite a crowd tonight. If you haven't taken the opportunity to sign in, if you please would, just so we can get a record of everybody that was here tonight. On our agenda tonight, there's also copies. If any of you want a copy of the agenda, there's copies there that you can review, or if you haven't picked one up already. Commissioners, are there any questions on the agenda tonight before we get going? Everything good? Okay. Has everybody had a chance to approve the minutes from our prior meeting back in July?
I'd make a motion that we approve the minutes.
We have a motion to approve the minutes. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
We have a motion and we have a second. All in favor of approving the minutes from our July 8th meeting?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Tonight we have 4 consent items. We have the 7200 North subdivision. Staff, do we have anything that we need to go over on any of these, or?
Not unless you have questions, or if somebody here in the audience is here for that item and has a question.
We can just pass.
What's that?
We can just pass them.
I just wanted to make sure the commissioners didn't have any questions on them, or if there was any discussion that we needed.
I'm happy to give just a brief overview for the audience maybe.
Okay, if you do that, Chris, thanks.
So if there's something on the agenda that's identified as a consent item, the commission can pass that as a group. They don't have to review those individually. So the question would be is if there's someone here that is a proponent or one of the agents for these items that has a question about the conditions perhaps, that might be something that the commission could consider. You would need to pull it from the consent agenda and add it to the regular agenda if that were the case. So if there is no one here, the commission can act to approve that as a block.
No. Is there anybody here that would like to move those to our regular action item? So with that, Commissioner, I'd accept a motion.
I'd make a motion that we approve the 4 consent items with the associated findings of fact.
We have a motion to approve the consent items and the findings of facts. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries on all the consent items. Tonight we have a public hearing on the TMB Nilsen rezone. Before we get into our hearing, I'd like to turn some time over to either Chris or Angie. Which one of you are? Angie, just for an update on that.
Yeah, so I'll just briefly go through the staff report that's been provided. This is a request to rezone 11.53 acres from the agricultural A10 zone to the rural 5 zone. This rezone would allow the property to be legally divided into a maximum of 2 separate lots as part of a subdivision process. Staff has identified some general information as it pertains to the subject property and to assist the Planning Commission and County Council in arriving at a decision. The parcel is legal as it exists in the same size and configuration since August 2006, with the exception of a small portion of the property which was removed to create a parcel for a Smithfield City well. That type of lot creation is exempt from the subdivision process. Under the current density requirements of the A10, they would not be able to divide this property further, but the RU5 may give them 1 additional lot. In looking at the context surrounding the subject property, attachment A is your map showing those contexts. So there are 13 parcels immediately adjacent to the subject property. 7 are vacant and have an average lot size of 58.3 acres, and 6 have a home with an average lot size of 21.6 acres. Add that to a quarter-mile buffer. There are 9 parcels with a home and an average lot size of 16.6 acres, and 12 parcels without a home and an average size of 39.3 acres. When we expand that buffer to a half a mile of the proposed rezone, there are 12 homes with a home with an average lot size of 17.6 acres and 21 without, with an average lot size of 45.8. The properties adjacent to the rezone, subject rezone, are primarily used for agricultural and residential. The subject is also located on Canyon Road, which is a scenic road that leads to forest recreation areas. The property is not located within a future annexation area. As identified by the Planning Commission and County Council at the time the RU5 zone was adopted, the intended or anticipated placement of the zone is in areas of unincorporated county adjacent to municipalities. The nearest municipality that borders the proposed rezone is Smithfield, which is approximately 1¼ miles away if you're going using Canyon Road. There is a property that's located about a half mile northeast of the subject property along Canyon Road that is zoned RU5. The Smithfield Canyon Estates rezone was approved in 2013 and rezoned 40 acres from A10 to RU5, finding that the subject property was compatible with the RU5 zone and adjoining land uses and had adequate access to services and could be developed without the need for variances or special exceptions. That property has never been subdivided, so it's still just 1 parcel that's in the RU5 zone. The current county land use ordinance does not specify the appropriate locations for the RU5, but did identify the purpose and includes the following: to allow for residential development in a low density pattern that can allow for rural subdivisions and smaller scale agricultural uses. This type of development should be located and designed to not unreasonably impede adjacent agricultural uses, nor to unreasonably conflict with the development standards of adjacent municipalities. To implement the policies of the Cache County-wide Comprehensive Plan, including those regarding improved roadways, density-based residential standards, clustering, moderate income housing and municipal standards, and the zone must be appropriately served by suitable public roads, have access to the necessary water and utilities, and have adequate provision of public services. So as I mentioned before, primary access to the subject property is from Smithfield Canyon Road, which is a county road, and it also has access from a private road. So Smithfield Canyon Road is a county road that has maintenance. It's classified as a minor local road. It is a unique road within Cache Valley, as it is a scenic road that provides access to residential properties and forest recreation areas, as well as being regularly utilized as a recreational route for outdoor enthusiasts. It consists of an average paved width of 20 feet, but is considered substandard as to overall paved width, right-of-way dedication, paved and gravel shoulders, and clear zone. The subject property itself has approximately 50 feet of frontage along Canyon Road, less than the 90 feet required. The private driveway access currently provides access to 2 other parcels, is classified as a private road. Under the code, current spacing is has to be a minimum requirement of 30 feet between private roads or public roads. but the current spacing is approximately 125 feet. As the property does not have the minimum frontage along the private road, or the public road, excuse me, the private access must meet the standards of a private road classification per the road manual in order to accommodate future development. There are some sensitive areas located on this property as well. The vast majority of the property is located within Source 2 of the Source Water Protection Zone and is immediately adjacent to a Smithfield City well. Under the code, no proposed septic system shall be permitted within a Zone 1 or Zone 2 as defined by the current drinking water source protection plan for any public culinary water system. The code further states that all proposed uses and/or buildings needing the use of water and sewage shall comply with the requirements of the Bear River Health Department, as this agency is considered the county expert in evaluating the proposed sewage systems. After receiving notice of this rezone, Bear River Health Department did contact staff regarding the location of the subject property within the source water protection area. And they stated that though it's not impossible, they believe it would be extremely difficult to locate a septic system in this area due to the protection area and a pond located nearby. They were able to accommodate another septic system on an adjacent property recently. But before any approval could be given for this property, they would have to look at it very closely and do a feasibility study to determine if it's possible or not. Again, they said it's not impossible, but extremely difficult. The property also has areas of steep and moderate slopes. Areas of steep slopes can't be developed and are removed from the net developable acreage. They can develop in moderate slope areas with review and approval of a geotechnical report prepared by an engineer. Public notice was posted online in 3 public places and mailed to the property owners within 300 feet in Smithfield City. Staff has not received any public comment regarding this, any written public comment. So based on the findings of fact in the staff report, staff is recommending denial of the Nilsen rezone as the subject property is located within Zone 2 of a source water protection zone, which does not allow for new septic systems. Further, according to Bear River Health Department, the county expert for septic systems, it would be extremely difficult to accommodate an alternative septic system due to the property's location. The subject property is not appropriately served by suitable public roads. Smithfield Canyon Road does not meet the minimum standards of a minor local road and is therefore substandard and not suitable for higher density development. And finally, conclusion 3, the subject property does not have the minimum required frontage along a private road required for the RU5. It is not possible for the existing private access driveway to meet the minimum standards for a private road, as it is substandard and does not meet the minimum access spacing requirements for public and private roads per the road manual. So that does conclude staff's report. If you have any questions.
Thank you, Angie. Commissioners, do you have any comments?
Hey Angie, did you guys look at how much acreage is left if you pull out the undevelopable?
We did not do a full analysis on that, but the applicant believed they still had enough.
What's that?
The applicant believed they still had enough to pursue this.
They would have to have 10 acres
Correct.
still.
On the septic system, they said there was another one approved. Was that in the same zone?
Yes, I can bring up the aerial here for you. Okay, so, sorry, I hope that's visible. This is the subject property, the one ending in 15. As you can see, this is the access that goes down to Canyon Road. I believe this is the property that Bear River is referring to as most recently had a septic, maybe a couple years back, I don't remember exactly when. But I can turn on the overlay so you can see the source water protection zone. Take some of these others off so it's not too crazy.
So where's the Smithfield City well located?
That's this one right here in the dark gray. And then the source water zone 2 is all of this in red. can zoom out a little so you can see how extensive it is. These gray circles are considered zone 1, and yeah, they're generally the site of a spring or well. Well, that's the source protection.
There's really no option for the frontage issue either, is there?
Looks like it's kind of
I
locked.
mean, you either
Yeah, they'd
make
have to
90
request a
feet or you
variance.
don't, right?
Not, they could pursue a request like to the Board of Adjustment with a variance,
Okay.
which is possible. The state sets a pretty high bar for that request, but it's possible.
That's why I was gonna ask if, because I don't recall approving, or maybe we can't approve anything that doesn't meet that standard anyway.
We typically would catch those instances before it got to the point that it's here, and they've made adjustments to that frontage.
So when you say catch, you send it back to them at the application time?
Not in this, I'm referring to other instances.
Okay, all right. Any other comments or from the commissioner? Or questions?
Well, I got one more quick question. It might not pertain to this, but under the land use context, you said the average lot size, you have 6 parcels with a home and an average lot size of 21 acres. What's the smallest lot size in that group? Got a trick question.
Maybe not a trick question, but it might take me just a moment. It's probably this lot right next to it here. 6.
Got an average of 6
Get the
parcels. with
information to come up.
21.6 acres. I just wonder what.
Yeah, I would guess. I mean, the minimum lot size in the county is also a half an acre for a buildable lot. It looks like 1.4 is the size of this parcel just immediately south of the property. One acre just to the other side of the private access road, so. Does that answer your question?
But they all border the road there, don't they, those small ones? All right. Thanks.
Glenn, did you have any comments? We'd like to open the,
Open up for public hearing, I guess.
yeah.
Take a motion to.
I'd make a motion that we open the public hearing for the S and B, or T and B Nelson rezone.
We have a motion to open the public hearing. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The hearing is now open. As far as instructions for the hearing, when it's your turn to speak, state your name and address the organization you represent. Indicate whether you're for or against the proposal. Make your statement, include all pertinent facts within your knowledge. Avoid gossip, emotion, and repetition. Comments should be addressed to the commission and not to individuals in the audience. And a clear and concise argument should focus on the matters related to the proposal. So with that, the public hearing is now open. If anybody would like to step and come forward.
Commissioners, Wayne Caldwell on behalf of the petitioners here that are requesting the rezone. I represent them and have helped them through the process of making this application. So if I can just maybe address the issues, it sounds like staff went through it quite thoroughly. So the issues that really aren't an issue here I want to address, and really we're left with the 3 issues that are problematic as addressed by the staff. The first one, that being the source water protection zone. And as mentioned in the report and as mentioned by Angie here, I think the issue is, as you look on the map, there was space in an adjacent lot that had the same issue. I think initially the Bear River Health Department indicated the same concern, and it was addressed and it was implemented less than 2 years ago. That septic tank was put in, and those homes that you see up above there are actually are being addressed by a septic tank that had to be laid outside of the source protection zone. So this lot, this remainder lot here, that's subject to the application for the rezone, has enough space to do that, and it also would, the owner in the application for the subdivision would have to address how that would be implemented, and there are multiple options that could be addressed there. And I think the report indicates the Bearwood Health Department was skeptical about that. They were skeptical about the other one, and it was approved as well. So I think to deny it based on those grounds, I think based on the evidence that's been provided as far as these adjacent property owners being able to do the same thing, I think would be hasty. I think it's a process that would have to play itself out in the actual subdivision process. I don't think it'd be an adequate reason to deny a rezone. So that leaves us with two remaining issues that I wanted to address. The road, the public road. It's the same public road. As you look further up the canyon, I know that this map doesn't go there, but further up the canyon, as addressed previously, there was a rezone of 40 acres to RU5. It's the same road even further up that services that rezone. It's the same issues apply there. I believe that if that was approved, I understand that the county is at least as part of this application process is indicating that it's substandard. However, it's the same road that was used for the rezone up above. So I think based on that, I believe it is adequate. I believe that it has been used for a rezone. I think there's precedent for that. And based on that, I think that issue, as stated in the other rezone, if the rezone for the wood rezone, the 40-acre rezone, it said that would be addressed further in the subdivision process. And that's where it sits at this point in time. So I think based on the precedent there and the fact that it was previously, that was rezoned and that the issue was to be reserved specifically for the subdivision process, I believe that that's what should happen here. I think the same procedure should be followed. And that leaves us with the last issue that is flagged as a potential problem is the private drive, the private road as identified in the recommendations. I would point out, and there was a previous, when this rezone, when this minor subdivision that you can see, I think that's, we can go back here to the, thank you, that there was a minor subdivision that this property that we have before the council tonight or the commission tonight is actually the remainder parcel from a prior subdivision. So this is not part of the subdivision, but it's the remainder parcel from that subdivision. That private road was part of the subdivision, or the width of that private road was part of the subdivision, as well as a private road just west of that. And both of those roads went before the Board of Adjustment, and for approval for that, and it was approved in 1997. And I think based on that and the fact that has been relied upon as a private road since that point in time, I believe that it should continue to be relied upon as the access to the property to allow one more access. This is one more building lot potentially up on top of the property. That's all the excess traffic that would be there. The report does indicate that there are other parcels that use that road. There's really only one other that has a agricultural easement to use it. The other properties have their own access, their own frontage. And so this would be at best 2 homeowners and 1 agricultural use to get in for agricultural purposes would be accessing this road. I believe that the road is adequate as approved by the Board of Adjustment in 1997. I believe that that the reliance upon that, the fact that the subdivision was approved based on that size of the road, and this is just a remainder parcel left over from that, would indicate that the private road is adequate. I would point out, and it's kind of hard to see from the map here, but across the creek there are lots of other lots that have access, and they have to use bridges to access their private road into their property. Those bridges are much more narrow than 50 feet. Those bridges are about 20 feet. And those bridges have recently, at least one of those has been recently approved within the last year as a way to access their property. I would submit that, based on the previous approval by the Board of Adjustment and the fact that this road is by multiple of 2.5 times wider than any of the bridges across the river, that there's adequate access to the property. And there's not a real justification to not approve the rezone. And I know that there are issues here that a finer point would need to be put on for a subdivision process, but at this point, we believe that we've met that burden and that the rezone should be approved at this point, and any of the other concerns can be addressed in a subdivision where feasibility studies and addressing some of the finer logistics that would need to go into a subdivision would make more sense at that point in the process. And I will submit it on that unless anybody has any questions of me.
Mr. Caldwell, what about frontage?
Yeah, so the frontage was an issue that I think went before the Board of Adjustment in '97, because that was also an issue in '97 for 2 private roads that were part of that minor subdivision. Both of those frontages were approved back then. That's what, in essence, if the frontage is now a problem, it would in effect landlock you have over 6 acres of flat land up on top of that property that is not otherwise able to be accessed in any other way. And so there's less than 1.5 acres that has been designated as slope. And so there is plenty of property there to have 2 lots and to provide for that. And I believe that with those 2 lots and the fact that these roads were previously approved, I think that those concerns have already been addressed. And as far as any other issues with the road, I understand that it'd be nice to go back in time and carve out some more property, but it was approved back then, and the parties have relied upon that for 30 years. If I can answer any other questions, I'd be happy.
Any other questions for Mr. Caldwell? Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
My name is Clay Bodley. I am representing Smithfield City. When Angie said that we had not submitted the staff had not submitted any written comment, after you transfer these into Word form, they will be the written staff response. We also have a prescriptive easement along that alley to go back and check the well. If you can see in that aerial, there is a spring box right behind that home that we need to check in order to keep the records sent to the Division of Drinking Water for how much water has come down there, as well as the Smithfield Creek water users. We are, in the first item on this, we are against the rezone. The reason being is, as you can see, that little square there, our Miles Spring. It is, would it be a problem to bring up that source protection zone again? That septic tank that was approved by Sean, as you look to the east there, his septic tank had to be moved outside of that zone. And so we feel that there's no area that it could be moved. If there were a septic tank approved, there would be nowhere you could put a septic tank. So it would be in the source protection zone for that well. Secondly, if there were a rezone and the density were increased, there is not a water source, and we feel that if there were a well drilled, it could negatively influence our spring. So those are the comments that I had and the reason that we were being against the rezone. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Do you have any other comment?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we close the public hearing.
We got one more.
One more.
hold that.
Hi, my name is Shauna. I just have one thing that I wanted to say. They were talking about that they had an easement up that lane, but is actually a deeded right-of-way that goes up that lane that's owned by someone else. So it does affect that. It's different than just an easement. It's the lane that goes up to the Nelsons. I just wanted to make sure that that was addressed, because it's not an easement, it is a deeded right-of-way.
Okay, noted, thank you.
My name is Kim Cronquist Jr. I would like to just have a comment. I'm neither for or against this rezone. However, there is a proposal to move some property lines at the time. And depending on which way that goes, it could drastically change the access to the property as well as the property lines to the adjacent properties. Like I say, I'm not for or against it, but I do feel that that should be final and determined before I think a decision is made.
So would those resolve any of these issues that have been brought up, or
I don't
is it
think
separate from that?
the only thing that it may affect is the septic system, because it does affect a lot of the bottom property. So,
Okay.
like I say, I'm neither for or against it, but so.
Any other questions for Mr. Cronquist?
So where you're saying there's, somebody else is trying to make a property line adjustment?
There was a proposal for a movement of the property lines between the Nielsen property and the Cronquist property,
Oh, okay.
and also the adjacent property across the lane, which would probably move the back property and then also the access properties. So, like I say, I'm neither for or against, but I think maybe that should be determined before a decision is made.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I would just like to point out that if, I was not aware of any possible boundary line adjustment, but a rezone is tied to the current legal description. So if the boundaries were to change, then another rezone, they would have to come back to rezone the areas that were now not part of the, or expanded outside of the existing subject property, if approved, so. Just want to make a note on that.
Thanks, Angie.
My understanding is that there is litigation there that, depending on the resolution, could affect that 50-foot access strip,
Increasing or,
potentially decrease it. I believe that's correct.
okay,
Say potentially decreasing
decrease that frontage.
that frontage.
That's my understanding. But that's not, I don't know how that litigation will be resolved, but I think that is an issue in the litigation.
Okay. Any other further comment?
Can I just address some of their concerns?
Please.
With regards to a boundary line adjustment, this is the current legal description, so this is what we based it on. There was a previous survey that showed it in a little different position, so that's why we proposed the rezone based on the new legal description. I think that's our worst case scenario if there were a boundary line adjustment. So any sort of litigation shouldn't involve the rezone. This is the current legal description. With regards to the water, and I didn't address it because it's in the report, but there are existing water rights that would provide water to the other parcel, culinary water rights. So that's not an issue as far as water rights. I don't know what they were talking about when they said there weren't water rights. That was something we submitted in our application and we provided proof of. So there are water rights. That's not going to be an issue. Thanks.
Well, excuse me, then, water rights to To Smithfield City?
No, no, to a spring that this subdivision that we've been talking about, the 96 subdivision, it was all based on water rights to Swamp Springs, which is a spring that's just east of the Smithfield City Spring.
Okay, so that water right goes with this.
Goes with this, yes. That property owns those water rights.
We have one other question for you, Mr. Caldwell.
Yes.
In the litigation, are there issues of prescriptive use or boundary by acquiescence that if resolved one way or the other could narrow the width of that access?
I don't believe so. So I believe that the issue is there was, if you look at a year ago, it showed a little different boundary line there. It doesn't remove any, this new,
The boundary by acquiescence or,
and that was our,
would not be on a part of the legal description. By definition, it wouldn't be part of
Right.
the legal description or the.
so this survey that the county adjusted its lines for actually adds property to the subject property. It actually makes it bigger. It slides some of the lines over, and so the boundary by acquiescence claim would be, do you take the old or you move it over 10 feet? That's what it comes down to is that issue. That issue I don't think it doesn't affect the property up above, and it doesn't affect the width of their right-of-way, their actual property that their driveway is on.
But until there's a resolution, it could affect, there could be a rezone that doesn't cover everything that.
I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, I can't predict that, but I will say if there was, I understand that would affect the rezone, but at this stage, I don't think it'd be a reason, I don't think it'd be a reason to not rezone it. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Mr. Caldwell.
For Sam Goebel, I'm representing Kim Cronquist and Terry Cronquist, which are the adjacent to the east and west to the access lane. And we're not taking a position on the rezone, but to clarify, Brittany and Travis sued Kim and Terry over these boundaries or something like it. And the counterclaim is that Kim, if you see the lawn line inside the access, has a boundary by acquiescence along that lawn. And Terry, if you look on the west side, owns the fence line, which is kind of mirrored by the green right up against the road by acquiescence. So if they were successful on their counterclaims, it would narrow it up to the boundaries of the road. And there's some other prescriptive use claims affecting, if you look immediately north of the Kim Cronquist parcel ending 0012. There's kind of it's right by that pond. There's a counterclaim for a right-of-way through there for accessing Kim Cronquist parcel, so he could make a loop back to the Smithfield City Road. And then the other issue and dispute is there's a barn behind Terry Cronquist parcel ending 0022, and the issue there is whether or not Terry Cronquist owns that entire barn by acquiescence, so that would shift the line to include the barn into Terry Cronquist parcel 0022. Now, again, we don't really care one way or another whether it's rezoned, but those are the counterclaims at issue that could affect the boundaries from what you see right now.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Goebel while he's there?
All right, thank you.
Thanks. Do we have any further comment? I take a motion to close the public hearing. So moved. We have a motion. We have a
I'll
second.
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion, public hearing is closed. Commissioner, what do we, any comment?
I guess where Smithfield City has, would like us, not to rezone that, but don't want any more homes in their water district. That puts a lot of precedence on it, and that, we've been fighting against all those easements and road widths and access for fire and everything else. So it looks like there's good reason for the denial.
The frontage I see is a big concern with, I don't think the frontage is gonna get bigger even with the litigation. If anything, it might decrease, so. Any other comment?
Is the RU5 subdivision further up the road? Has that been built out or?
No, it's never been divided, it's just the rezone into.
And is that because of the improvements to the road that would be needed to make that approvable, or do you know?
I don't think so. I think it's a property owner decision not to do that.
And it's also, I think, important to keep in mind, road manual has, the requirements have changed over time.
Yeah, since
Yes,
8 years
since-
ago
yeah.
or whatever. Yeah.
Any other comments, Commissioners?
Well, as I went down through the findings of fact, I would have to agree there's a lot of obstacles in passing this. You've got the water issue with the septic issue and the road standards, and I would have to recommend denial to the county council too until all these issues can be addressed, so.
I agree, that's what I felt as I read through all of the material, and I just don't feel like we can, as it sits now, approve it.
Okay.
With the widths and the frontage. And the setback.
Okay. I take a motion. Are we to that point? Any other comment or question?
I guess I'll make a motion that we recommend to the county council a denial of the T&B Nielsen rezone.
We have a motion to recommend denial of the T&B Nielsen rezone. Do we have a second?
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Our next item of business tonight is the Cache Valley Straw Maze conditional use permit.
Can I make a comment really quick, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, go ahead.
For those of you who are here to participate for that item, it'll now move to the county council agenda at their next available meeting. That is not this next meeting. I think it's 2 meetings out from that. So they typically will set a hearing and then hold a hearing. This next meeting is too soon to get to set it. So it'll be the second meeting in August they'll set it, and then the first meeting in September they'll hold it. But feel free to contact our office with any questions about that. We don't want you to miss information there.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Do we have any discussion on the Cache Valley conditional use permit? Do we have some, can we get an update on that or what? First-
Yeah. Excuse me. I can give a brief update there, as I missed the meeting when you took action, so I apologize, I missed that. I think I was out of town, I was happy to be out of town, it's all right. Had a great time.
This is your punishment.
That's my punishment. But it's been an interesting process, so as you're aware, you made the action to approve the conditional use permit with imposed conditions. Now, that action was appealed to the Board of Adjustment. In the process of all that happening, the original purchaser who was going to purchase the property decided not to purchase the property and indicated to us they wanted to withdraw their application, which had already been approved. So we can't just simply withdraw it. That would have been great. But what that means is then we then contacted the current owner of the property to confirm that they had no interest in pursuing that use. Because that use doesn't stay with the proponent, it stays with the property. And so with that confirmation that they had no intent to pursue that use, we've been in contact with the attorney for the appellant, and we've worked with our attorney here in trying to figure out how to unravel that. It appears the best process would be to bring that back to the Planning Commission with the information that the proponent and the current property owner no longer wish to pursue that use. And then to bring that information to you to then be able to revoke that approval.
Okay.
That's it. That's all I've got.
Are you guys here tonight with the straw maze?
Okay.
So is there action tonight that we can take, or you want us to take, or
Just
do we have to
revoke
wait?
it.
You can vote to revoke the permit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Easy enough.
I'd make a motion to revoke the Cache Valley Straw Maze conditional use permit
Would you specify the,
based on
The
the
comments I
applicant, the original applicant withdrawing his decision and the current property owner having no desire to pursue it.
We have a motion. Do we have a
I'll
second?
second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
we'll now take that back to the appellant's attorney, and they'll have that confirmation, and then we'll proceed with the Board of Adjustment as needed. If they withdraw that appeal, then that would make sense. There's nothing to appeal at this point.
So the board hasn't taken action or anything?
Correct.
Thanks, Chris.
We tried, but we didn't have a quorum, so it got delayed. Anyway, go ahead, sorry.
No, great. Thanks for everybody that showed up to the tour we had this last week. As a result of that, I think Chris has a bunch of literature for us to read or go over.
So I'll apologize first. I was a little bit irritated last time we met that no one had read the stuff I gave you in such a short notice, which is a little bit funny in hindsight, so I apologize.
Okay, I didn't read it either, so I'm gonna leave now.
Well, excuse Angie, she's got some other appointments she needs to be to. So the last time we spoke, the intent was to take a moment to look over that information that was given and see if there were any questions regarding the discussion, steps, and even the draft ordinance that had been prepared. In addition to that, at the time, we had planned to go make that site visit, which we did, which I really enjoyed. I thought it was, every time we've done that, it's been very positive, and we need to do those all the time. But then, following that, I committed to get you some information about what the current county code states, and then I've also provided some of the state code as reference to help support and help build the understanding of what's happening there. So some of the questions we had were, what does a winery license include? And then the other is, what role does a package agency play? So really, we were concerned that tasting wouldn't be included. I brought up that concern, and to what level tasting would be included, and if they'd be able to sell product also from the site. So that's what's in this pile, and I told the chair before we started here, I'm happy to go through this tonight, but I don't think that would be fruitful. I'd be happy to pass this out tonight and give you time to review it, and then we can come back and chat some more about it. But I can give you an overview, if we don't mind passing that down. There's 10 copies. I think there's a note there.
As a result of the tour, there was one thing that stood out to me. I think it went along with tasting and the current, is that addressed in this?
Yes.
Okay.
In fact, I have a copy.
But it wasn't included in the current state ordinance or something?
It is.
It is? Okay.
That was a question we wanted to clarify.
Okay.
In the state, but not in the county, right?
Yeah, so the county does adopt most of what the state.
notes in it?
It does have some clarifying notes as you look at it.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Chris, one thing that I really appreciated from that tour was further clarification that there's a lot of this stuff here that we've discussed or bounced around that we don't really need to worry about. The state's already got it covered. So could you do you have anything specific that you're still concerned about or that needs to be addressed by either the Planning Commission or the council, some line items that we're focusing on, or?
I don't have any concerns after reading through the material with what we've talked about within the ordinance itself, with the exception of what was brought up last time is the what's the proper designation or limitation on cases produced? And what role does that play? Does it have a role? Is it important? That's a bigger discussion we haven't had. Initially, it was identified, if you recall, that there's a break between, I think it's up to 999, and then it's 1,000 to 4,999, and it's 5,000 to 14,999 in the breakdown of the number of cases that can be produced annually by, let's say, a winery. And the question was, initially, I had pointed to that lowest tier, and the question is that appropriate? Does that give a business flexibility? Does it really have an impact or make a difference if we bump them to the next tier or the next tier? What are the real impacts? And so I think the site visit was helpful to see their process and get an appreciation, at least in some sense, knowing that their primary product isn't the cases of wine. I think they estimated currently 20 to 30 cases per year. Going off my memory, I'm not looking at my notes, but some of you probably recall that.
Yeah, it was down a lot now.
I kept asking them.
Yeah,
We never
Well,
got
pretty
the
vague.
answer.
I think they at one time were rolling pretty good with the farmers markets. I was actually surprised. I don't know if discouragement or what has caused them, or lack of,
And we talked with them on that.
yeah.
Yeah, it would have been helpful, like if they were able to say, oh, if we were pursuing this, full bore or whatever, we could do X number of cases or something like that would have been helpful. Or we did this many at our highest production or something like that, but.
It was a challenging comparison for me in one sense because they'd already divided their operation into kind of their ag and then their manufacturing. So there are similarities, but also they recognized a need to distinguish those factors for their operation. And that may not be the same for this operation. They might feel like there's a good cohesion with those two things to work together.
And just a question on you mentioned I do recall seeing the tiers, but in doing my own studies, the only thing that I really saw there or found there was taxation. So I guess I'm still a little torn with why are we even trying to limit or restrict, but outside of that, is there any other real concerns that the county has? And just like the meat packing, we drug it around, we kicked it around forever. We needed them in service 6 months ago, and it might be another 6 months before they even get in service. So I kind of hate to see us keep holding these people up if we don't have a specific agenda of what are we concerned about, and what are we doing to get past it?
I think the only thing I would raise, it's not a concern, it's just a point of where are we going to draw a line? So the question is, what do we consider ag, and what do we consider manufacturing? And how do those intertwine to the point that we're comfortable with that measure? So if it's small scale, that's how we handled the slaughter facility, was small scale slaughter. It was confined in kind of what it could do. We went to the one and saw that its impact was minimal and was well kept, and we saw some conditions we could include in that definition that would minimize that impact. And so that made it an easy decision to say, yep, this is ag, we can control some of those impacts, which are primarily smell, and et cetera. I don't know if I have an answer on this other, because of the possibility of that being able to grow, because I support the idea that there needs to be flexibility with the business to do what it needs to do. Like we saw with Slide Ridge, they made a lot of different products that just came as a course of doing their business and recognized a need. I think that's a good business, and I don't think that I wouldn't be interested in trying to influence or discourage that. But then where do you draw the line between what is really an agricultural value-added ag operation and what is now a full-on manufacturing operation?
And to me, when we were looking at those different categories or whatever, I think it was pretty easy or pretty obvious maybe. There's sort of the smaller tier of 3 or 4, I can't remember exactly, and that encompasses 80% of small businesses or something like that. I liked that kind of range as a line between maybe what we could call agriculture and obviously bigger than that is more manufacturing. That was my thoughts on
coming out of the
The
tour, I
number-
was
number
thinking
of
similarly,
cases, yeah.
just to that, just the bottom three categories seem to fit what we were targeting, but at the same time, it would limit the upside, but even limiting the upside, if it's ag-based, I mean, what stops, you know, just like the honey, the wine, I mean, they're a big conglomerate, they're bringing in a bunch of honey, what stops them, you know, do we wanna limit?
What,
It is ag-based, I mean, what's?
in a way, that's an advantage to them guys, because that whole facility, I mean, you look at the honey that they're rolling through there, and it justifies the facility. When we start talking about a wine facility and winery, I mean, I don't know what else they could do. Maybe Keith could tell us what other things he could do there, but if he's just producing wine, this comes down to some simple math. I mean, if you're investing $2.5 million in equipment, and government's telling them that they can only put out 5,000 cases and they're making 50 cents a case, well, we're just wasting our time. So we either gotta know the numbers, or we gotta know something that gives us some direction here. Because for us to tell them, to restrict them on the money that they can make, I don't know any other way to figure it.
That's really, I think it's a challenge. And it's something we typically, as a planning commission, don't delve into, is trying to check the numbers to make sure they're viable. That's 100% on the property owner, from my perspective. But what I think we need to be aware of is that we're not putting too tight of a circle around what we're trying to put together. So that's why I'm only referring to the line of how we distinguish ag from manufacturing, so we protect our ag zone. I don't disagree with what you said, Brady. I do think that's important, but I think that as we look over the history of the county and some of the challenges that the agricultural zone has faced, we see this pendulum swing where on the one hand, initially when they adopted the ag zone, they said, no business, only ag and a story. And they were very restrictive on that. But they got a lot of pushback. So over the years, you started to see that creep in with the ordinance changes. And then it swung back far enough that within, I think it was 2012, the commission and council voted to amend that code again to take a lot of those uses that had been permitted in the ag zone out, because it was just a free-for-all and everybody could do whatever. So we'll continue to have that discussion because it isn't a clear line that's drawn between ag and kind of a manufacturing type operation. And that's, I think, a challenge for the commission and the council to have to decide where that line is. I think it was an easy line to draw with the slaughter facility because we could limit it by the number of animal units. That was a clear line. But production of number of cases seems a little more nondescript for what the impact might be.
I don't think there was anybody here, maybe Chris Sands. One other manufacturing facility I can think of was when Rose Hill Dairy put in their bottling facility out in Hiram. Was you involved with that?
It was Rose Hill?
Yeah, Wilkinson's, Rose Hill Dairy out on 6600 South.
That was
I'm not
before
sure.
me.
Huh?
That was before me.
Just curious what their process was, because they bottled milk, they made cheese, they did a number of things there. I don't even know if they're functioning today. They're not?
They're tight. They have a subsidiary in Morgan,
That does it?
but because that was just they pasteurized their own milk, essentially, it probably didn't have the scrutiny that we're talking about here, of course.
Well, I'd wonder, that's my point. I would wonder if they had any. And I know that they brought milk in there, all the milk that was used.
Yeah, as long as they quit milking cows and bought milk.
Yeah, milk was definitely hauled in there. It wasn't just produced on site.
Right.
But they made cheese, they did
Were
milk.
they in the county, or was that in Hiram?
6600 South at the time, I think, was
I
county.
think they were in the county.
Yeah, since then, I think it's now Hiram City,
But
but
I think they've done one expansion, or they did some sort of adjustment, probably 5 or 6
yeah,
years ago.
subdivision.
Yeah.
Just one sec, yeah.
So are we still trying to decide, like, is it up to us or is it a council decision on that percentage that it had to be like grown on grown outside, and he was saying, okay, what about a bad crop year? Is that, we're not deciding that, though. You said council already made a number there?
You are deciding it.
We are
Council's made
deciding
given some direction to the planning commission, very loose. They want you to be able to look at that and make a decision. And what I would hope is we have something that's substantively supportive of that number. I think perhaps sometimes those are a bit arbitrarily arrived at. It would be good to have some basis in logic or fact to tie that down. But yeah, it does come back to the commission.
Well, I'll just insert that ultimately the council will
Right.
decide.
Right.
But they haven't given you
Right, we're
what they want the
recommending.
suggestion
No,
to be.
right,
What they-
right. I understand, we're just recommending.
Chris, could I clarify one thing in here? We focused a lot on winery operations, but as I've looked at the ordinance, we talk about type 5 package facilities as well. That could also include breweries, as I understand it, producing heavy beers under the state definition.
I don't believe so.
Is that, okay, that was my,
I think that the ordinance, well, the intent of the ordinance was to.
if you look on the second page there where it talks about for winery manufacturing license and type 5 package agency, and in the materials from the state, that is in the definition of, or, there was a,
It says packaged liquor, wine, or heavy beer.
yeah, liquor, wine, or heavy beer, and anyway, that's the reason for the clarification on that.
Without a beer manufacturing license to go with it, the state's not going to give you a type 5 package license to be packaging beer if you don't have a license to be making the beer.
But if our ordinance allows that, and they secure that license from the state, it would be allowable under our ordinance, or?
Our ordinance, yeah, sorry.
Our ordinance only allows for a wine manufacturing license and a package agency license that would be associated with the wine license. You would, to get I don't think it's even the right name, but a beer manufacturing license, there would also have to be county approval of that, which there isn't. And so you wouldn't be able to get a package license that ties to
Okay.
to making.
I mean, that was really my question, was just to clarify that if it was.
Yeah, type 5 means you have to have a manufacturing facility and be selling only what you produce. You can't buy gin from the state liquor store system and sell their package it.
Yeah, I was wondering if there was any leeway or, any openings in here that somebody says, hey, I grow barley. I can.
A lot of barley grown in Cache County.
Yeah, we have a lot of barley here and
Malt barley.
The county would have to come back and first allow.
I just wanted to clarify that that was not there. As just a cursory overview, I was like, oh, does that give us opening to really make this a broad
I think Nolan can speak to this as well as I can, but I think that what the council is looking for is something in the land use part that you'll recommend that incentivizes that winery manufacturing be associated with growing grapes or growing apples or whatever it is that you're making wine out of, and not that it become just winery manufacturing, where you're bringing in the product to make the wine. That the council appeared to be very interested in. We're going to do alcoholic production in the county, that it be promoting agriculture and not simply importing ag product to produce alcohol.
In line with what Melinda said, bad year or whatever, we also took that into consideration because everybody has that. But this was brought in along the lines of agriculture, agritourism, and so that we don't end up with a manufacturing place that was zoned agricultural. That's why we're saying there needs to be growth. So we understand that there will be blighted years and everything else, but there still needs to be tied to growth so that there is tying into agricultural, rather than saying, I had 3 bad years in a row, so then I'm just going to go buy all my beer
for all my grapes from somewhere else, and he found that source, and now all of a sudden, we have a manufacturing rather than a growing thing. This was under the agricultural side, so that's where our two tentacles are sticking in and trying to make sense of that.
And I'll say that after, partway through the last meeting, when Chris was frustrated, I did finally read through the draft, and I think that he's provided good language that still needs some filling in the blanks or tweaking from you, but that goes a long way to addressing that.
And as commissioners, I think that's what we're after, some direction on how we can make this thing progress. I mean, yeah, we've got a big packet to go through, and it'd be tough to cover it all tonight and go through it. I mean, as far as direction going into our next meeting, what would you like to see us be prepared to do to make this thing progress? What's the?
You kind of indicated that we've got to come up with just kind of a number. Is that?
If we have comments, do you want it ahead of time or not until next meeting?
I love them ahead of time.
Okay.
Yeah, you can text me tomorrow or email me tomorrow, whatever you have. We can have a discussion there. I think there's 3 blanks coming to the top of my, I'll look at it really quick here, but I wanted to, before I address those blanks that need to be filled in, what I think we should do, maybe we're not quite ready to have a planning or a public hearing next meeting, but maybe the next. So either I'd recommend we do a public hearing in September or October to address a finalized version that's clean enough that can receive public comment and shape some of those discussions before we're too far down that road. But then those blanks that need to be addressed are, if you still have your packet from last time, it's not number 3, wine produced by the processing facility must be produced from blank % or more of the agricultural products that have been grown on site or on the contiguous legal parcels. So I think that's what John and both Nolan have referenced in regard to making sure that there's an agricultural component tied to this type of use. The other one that's related to that has to do with the crop failure or damage. It says, it's under number 4, and this is the last sentence, the use of agricultural products grown off-site beyond the allowed blank %, which is referencing the previous % number, is only permitted for the production year during which the failure or damage occurred. So we'd have to look at that and see if a year is a good idea. The percentage should be carryover. And then
With that too, you got to look at startup. So when you're 4 to 5 years from having any product or enough product, you can't just go off of a dry year. You've got to, are we going to allow you to make any money the first 5 years of your investment?
I think we're making some assumptions there that they haven't already started.
Well, this whole thing's assumption.
So and that's why I say I want to be careful with the money side when we make those assumptions because it's too specific. And for me, I think that there's the broader scope that we need to leave a broad enough window but not get stuck in the numbers. Number 5 is there's an or right here. So there's 2 approaches that could be considered. So really what you'll need to do is make a decision on which approach you're comfortable with. The second approach, so remember the first one, number 4, is talking about what to do in a production year if there's failure or damage. The second one talks about the same thing, insufficient supply, crop failure or damage. Let me skip to the end here. It has more to do with, I'll read the last part of the sentence, if the aggregate purchase, let me start again. The wine producer may also purchase bulk beverage, fermented, brewed, or distilled by a licensed alcohol manufacturer and blend the beverage with the farm alcohol producer's alcoholic beverage. If the aggregate purchase does not exceed blank % of the farm alcohol producer's annual beverage production. So the idea there is to show that they're not increasing their production because they had a bad year, but they're maintaining their production because of a bad year. It all comes back to that percentage on what that really reflects. So I think that needs to be vetted more than what I've written. So I'd love to have feedback on those 2 or options, 4 or 5, and where the flaws might be or what other considerations might need to be.
Can I just ask on the number 3, we talk about contiguous parcels and that, was the council very tied to that? I mean, I look at this and say, okay, we want to tie it to agriculture, Well, so a farmer has multiple parcels around in the valley, would the.
Very
you know,
common,
would the-
very common. Yeah, which is
Very common to do that, and maybe Petersboro grows a special grape because of whatever, and.
Because of the terroir that's over there in
Yeah,
Peters.
whatever that is, and.
It's 42 dogs.
And anyway, the question is, I mean, we're focused on agricultural production. Do we really care that it's contiguous parcels, or is it or could it be parcels in Cache County? To me, that makes as much sense and probably makes it more, and I know we don't want to go economically viable, but that could buffer some of your bad crop years. You know, a hailstorm goes through this part of the valley, but the other side of the valley it didn't, and so Slide Ridge, maybe they put in vineyards over there, and then it goes back and forth. I don't know. I don't know if the council was very set on that language, or if there's some leeway in maybe just opening that up to production from within the valley.
I think anything that's reasonable is going to be very acceptable to the council. So what you're going to find on this section of code right here, number 2 is going to refer to the Farmland Assessment Act. So that's your first ring, right? It kind of hems things in. You have to meet the Farmland Assessment Act requirements.
Yep.
Now this next one tightens that ring and says not only does it have to meet the Farmland Assessment Act, but now you have to have legal contiguous parcels, which is more challenging. So you could look at it and say, you know what, we think that the Farmland Assessment Act is a sufficient measure. And we don't need the third item to bring that in tighter. That it makes sense to have a broader picture, just as you described. I think that's great reasoning to make that case to the council and to anybody. So that's kind of the discussion I'd love to hear coming from the council, and provide some cleaned up language or language that reflects what your thoughts are, that would address that, number 3, and then choose between number 4 and number 5 as maybe some best options, or kind of mix and match there if there's a better option to be had. The other piece is not highlighted, that probably should be, is number 7 on the list. That's our annual production limit. So the numbers that Chris was referring to on those lower tiers, so limited production is less than 1,000. My numbers are off a little bit. Very small is 1,000 to 4,099. That's 81% of wineries in the U.S. are those 2 pieces.
Exactly.
And everything else goes above that, so small goes from 5,000 to 49,000. It's a big jump. And that would reflect, based on this data, a 6%. And I know we can get into the details of what will work with this specific site, and this is always my caution, is it doesn't just apply to this site. This is valley-wide. There's other people who are going to be interested. And so while I value the opinions and the input of everybody that's going to be attached to this, it's broader. And so I would encourage that as we look at that, as you encouraged me last time, we need to change some of the language to reflect not just wine, but wine under the broader sense of how the state defines it, which is including those, forgot the word. Sorry, it's not coming to me.
That graph, or
My apologies.
that chart's not in this particular.
No, that's
It's in our last.
We'll have to combine it, okay.
Yeah, so. Highlight on that too, that in terms of percentages, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but trying to decide how much product should be grown in the valley really goes to keeping this tied to agriculture. The second question of how much to produce is more a question of what's appropriate in our ag zone. Do we end up with so much production that it's not agriculture anymore, it's industrial going on in the ag zone? So in my mind, there's kind of those 2 different issues, making sure it's tied to agriculture, and then.
How many dairies are we out telling them how many cows they can have? How many wheat farmers are we telling them how many acres they can harvest?
Cows we do.
Well, really, where?
Well, it's called a CAFO, right? concentrated animal feeding operation. So when it comes to that, if you have a large operation like that, they do come to this body. We don't have that typically in the county.
Yeah, because we have anything that big.
We don't have anything that big. But that's a good question to ask. I think it's a valid question. And it comes back to that point of what is the purpose of our ag zone? What do you want it to be? What is the described purpose in your code of what the intended ag zone is? Those are critical pieces to discuss.
And does it take a bigger facility to do more bottles?
But I just had one question when Nolan was talking, and I don't know this answer, so I'm seriously curious. So we're talking about a winery that's tied to agriculture. If we had somebody within the valley, out of the valley, whoever, that comes in here and decides we want to build a winery in Cache County, and we don't want to grow any of it, we just want to do it here. If it was in the county and they come in and got a CUP, are we going to limit them or restrict them in any way? Or if they get approved, are they going to get the green light and go for it?
This goes back to what John has said. Do you want manufacturing in the agricultural zone? This goes back to what we're doing on the countywide master plan. Do we want manufacturing outside in the county where we have to provide services for and everything else? So there comes just exactly what John's talking about. Agricultural, manufacturing. If somebody comes in and wants to do a manufacturing, they're going to sit before you and say that, but you've got to decide, do we want a manufacturing outfit sitting out in Petersboro where we've got to provide services as the county?
Well, okay, I'll keep going.
So we're trying to look at that to say, this was brought in the scopes of agricultural. This is how we can keep agricultural going. So in that scope of agriculture, we're saying, okay, if we're putting this in agricultural, let's find out how we keep and promote agricultural. Nobody came to us and said they wanted a wine manufacturing plant. That hasn't been discussed. If that comes, then we've got to decide, are we going to allow it in the 810 zone? And if so, we've got to change it to manufacturing and what goes on from there. There's the scope. We're looking at it from the council saying, where do we want manufacturing? Where do we want agricultural? And how do those two intertwine? Does that make sense?
It does. So, but as I think on that, right now in Cache Junction, we got Walton Feed that manufactures feed. They're in the county, correct? Guild Edge Flour Mill in Richmond is now in Lewiston City boundaries, if I'm correct, but at one time they was in Richmond City.
They're still in the county. Guilty.
They're still in the county. Casper's Ice Cream.
Still in the county.
So we've got manufacturing facilities, and I'm not trying to compare these to
Brady, I'll address what may be the elephant in the room. There were at least some members of the council who were hesitant to allow alcohol manufacturing in the county straight up. But if it was tied to keeping ag land, they were willing to make the concession to allow alcohol manufacture, for the county to no longer be a dry county, it's the unincorporated areas, that it was kind of a trade-off. Now, you may not agree with that. You may be of the opinion the alcohol part doesn't matter, but it mattered to at least some of the council members, perhaps a majority, that if they were going to vote to allow wine manufacturing, it needed to be tied to keeping ag land in ag production. And so as you, and if you were to go back and listen to those meetings, I think you hear that, and then they put the condition in the alcohol ordinance that it will not become effective until an accompanying land use ordinance is passed. And so I think that it will be difficult to get a land use ordinance through the council that doesn't make sure that the scenario that you just talked about could not happen. That someone comes in and says, I don't want to grow anything here, I just want to produce wine here. That's not what the council had in mind. They want it tied.
Today, though, you couldn't get that even if you had a CUP. That could not happen in this county.
Correct.
And may I add that though the council votes, we are contacted by huge amounts of public from the county as to their thoughts, and we're listening to our constituents. So when you look and see how things are voted, you've also got to take in the fact of what the council member thought and was hearing from its constituents in its area. So that has a huge area. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It was more fun as a commissioner, wasn't it, Nolan?
I get both of them now, so, John White sold me a bum cow when he talked me into this.
Well, and so here's a question moving ahead. We're told that when we're working on these, well, that's after an ordinance is established. Opinion comes out of it. It's ordinance. We're going off of not, I mean, we can fill this room with opinion and people's, the sewer deal, the Humaner was the perfect example. How much sentiment, whatever, did we get from people versus the facts? But the difference here is we don't have an established ordinance, so opinion still counts to put the ordinance together. And then once it's drawn, is that correct?
Yeah, whether to adopt an ordinance is a political decision. And so, yeah, opinions matter. Once the ordinance is adopted, then you have to follow the ordinance, whatever it is. But right now, there's no ordinance, so opinions matter on what that ordinance is going to look like.
I mean, if this thing would have been brought before the council, not under the scope of agricultural, there would have been a different discussion. But so much of it came forth as this is an alternative to keep agricultural ground and keep things open. Sure. So we listened to that part. Yeah. And when you listen to that part, you have to separate out and say, I don't want to introduce manufacturing into what we're trying to protect as far as agricultural open space or the viability of agriculture from a manufacturing point.
So Chris, we need to refer back to last month's handout to look at that 2 pages and provide some feedback to you. And then what you've given us tonight is a copy of the ordinance that was passed by the council, state regulations for winery manufacturing, a reference guide to the package agency, and then definitions from the state that go along with that. So that's kind of our packet of stuff that we can use to understand what's in place now, what's allowed by the state, and then where you're looking for feedback.
That'd be great, yes. I have one thing to add, and that kind of ties in with the discussion that's being had. This is Cache Junction on the screen right now. The big purple area is industrial. So when we start talking about different manufacturing ag-type facilities, they're in different zones. They're in different situations, and so they've been set up that way. So it's not like we're telling folks they can't do this, but there's a different process. They can't qualify as this. They need to now become ag manufacturing, or they need to qualify as an industrial use because of the scope and scale of their operation. So nothing's changed there. In fact, this is a step back. Our current ag manufacturing zone, or use requires 75% or more come from the property. So if we were to step that back, this is a reduction. If we went just to 51 or whatever it was to show there was a majority coming from the county, not from the property, but from the county. So really this is quite a step in a lenient manner away from what has been a very strict standard in the past. And I'm not saying that's good or bad, it's just that's the direction it's moving. And so just keep in mind as you look at that, we're not opposed to what they're trying to do, it's the scope and the scale. So what's the intent? Do they have room to grow in that zone? We want to be mindful of those things too. Not just from the money side, but from how do they fit in these other uses side. That's all I'd add.
So just, if I could, Joe, just something to think about when we talk scale. I think it's easy to look at the 1 or 2 examples that we have, but I think if we're trying to foster agricultural production here in the valley, and I go back to viability because that's, even though it's not how we want to base those things, it's the reality. If I had two of these wineries with a small production, that could be challenging for them to be viable. But maybe I have one that the scale is larger. So when we look at that number of cases and those things, that area, that winery could produce enough to be economically viable and be able to, and that's why I go back to the contiguous property. Do we really care about that? Should it be property within Cache Valley, and then we foster, you know, maybe this winery, we decide X number of cases, and they can, and that can allow other production throughout the valley, whether it's leased property or owned property, to go into more agricultural production. That is higher value than what we can currently produce on those. And we look at grape production, a lot of this will go into some of those marginal steeper slopes, and you know, if I understand, he can talk to us about that, but it may actually keep property from being developed because it's a higher value crop than others. Anyway, that's as we look at the scale there, I think we need to keep that in mind. 6 really small wineries out there may be a lot worse than one that's bigger scale, but can allow that much more production to happen in the valley. That's my.
What about putting one in a commercial zone?
And that's another option as well.
Then the grapes are raised out in the county.
But it's not necessarily the direction that the council has given us.
Because the way it was submitted was to be grown on farm. You know, a lot of these wineries are on farm, on site, you know. If somebody wanted to open up a winery in the manufacturing zone, I mean, that'd have to be treated separately, so.
From the proponent, Mr. Chairman.
He's wanting to speak.
Yeah,
I'll give you a really good
yeah, we're trying to keep. I've held off, I got it.
I know, I got out of control.
Last meeting, we were all over the place, and I'm trying to keep us, you know, trying to focus us a little bit, trying to get things narrowed down, and that's kind of.
I'll keep it very focused. I gave Chris a man's name by Steve Martin. He owns Steve Martin and Associates. He's written these policies for multiple states, or multiple cities in states. San Luis Obispo, I think, was one of them, on what case sizes do you break it into, and how should they be? When you look at that percentage number, I will only say this. When it says 80% of the wineries are this size, you have to understand that when you're in like Lodi or in most grape growing areas, they have custom crush facilities. And so a small little guy can come in and rent the facility and millions of dollars worth of equipment to make his wine, bottle it, and take it back out, and he sells it in his little boutique store on Main Street. For a winery like us, I have no resources to turn to. There's the nearest custom crush facilities in Napa, Idaho. So that's not going to work for me. So I have to grow enough grapes and have enough bottles to justify the equipment that we have to purchase. And then on the percent, there was, anyway.
Which is how many? So how many?
We have to, just to justify the equipment to get it going, we need to be close to 2,000 to 2,500. And then cases, you really don't, and you really don't break good profitability till you're nearing 5. But,
do you think 5 is a reasonable line for?
I like the small, and if you want to create, what most counties do is they create tiers. They say, okay, we'll allow to 5, and at 5 you've got to come back and we readdress whether you should go to 10, and they do it like that. And Steve would be, I don't want to put that out there, just he's willing to do a conference call with you and let you just throw these questions at him, from the percentages to what do most places do for this, how do they regulate most things. And I mean, it's what his business is he builds wineries, and he can explain to you why they have to be in the ag zone versus in the municipal zone and stuff like that.
The 5,000 number he throws out, I'm just thinking, you know, 5,000 works today, and 10 years from now when things have blown up and, you know, things are working real well, and you're at 10,000, what stops it from 10? You know, a good farmer will expand, and, you know, what stops it there? As long as I think it comes back, how we tie it to the land use, I think that's what we're after, by the sound of things.
But he did mention checkpoints. Start at 5, you have checks.
Well, if you can create the thing where you're like, well, because the normal standard is a small winery is up to like, Chris, was it 50,000? It was huge.
That's the next tier.
Yeah, it goes to the next tier. Well, most will say at that point, you should be in the industrial zone.
So that's tier
See,
what?
that's what I like, is a checkpoint where we've, small, medium, and holy flip, what have we got here?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Keith.
But it's a staged
Yes,
process.
exactly.
And maybe the point where there's the custom crush facility in our industrial zone here because we've developed some great strain of grapes here in
Exactly.
Cache Valley that makes it
The Cache
viable.
grape.
Yeah.
So am I looking at this wrong? We addressed the elephant in the room over here is whether, it kind of came down to the county, the council, whether we're pro or against the alcohol being produced in the county. I mean, that kind of throws the burden back on us. I mean, it comes down to,
Well, they want us to make a good recommendation that sounds reasonable.
We're just sharing that elephant with you guys. That's all we're doing.
hey, thanks, yeah.
I'll send this out again. They did give you a list of questions.
Okay.
So that, I'll send out this
That'd be
packet
helpful.
again. This same packet has
Yeah.
the meat that you want to go through.
Yeah.
The other stuff's supportive that you get today. So go through this packet again. I'll send it out tomorrow or tonight.
Said we're doing this.
And just go through those questions. That's what the council's looking to see addressed. And if we can address those questions in a very reasonable, supportive fashion, they're going to be supportive of that.
Thanks, Chris. Any other comments? Thank you. We're adjourned.
My friend goes to California every year, and they go on these business tours.
Yeah.
So that becomes a big tourism industry.
If we don't
What's that?
if we don't want houses on
Right, but they may not be for.
But that's Utah wanting to control it.
I get it, I mean,
A reminder out to everybody, halfway,
I'm not one that, I want to put it with
Huge markup.
alcohol production.
Right, I don't think they want
Because
to
of
be
my
known.
background.
Right, I don't think they want to be known as Napa, the new Napa Valley.
However,
so it's not half, so it gives you for
Yeah,
one,
but
we
I
can
go
have
to
it
the
by
store.
second.
50% markup cultural property because it's viable.
Yes.
It's not what the suppliers would sell it for.
And, I like, I'm no expert on grape production, but I lived in the Central Valley of California.
Yeah.
And I saw where they had a lot of this production. And I could see if we could produce a grape that would be viable, I could